Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Go. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you guys are listening to us on. I say it every episode. I'll continue to say it every episode. Thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you for the kind messages, the emails, the really nice tweets that you guys have sent my way personally or through the podcast. Thank you guys. And we're going to jump right into this one. I always like the opportunity to be able to talk about referees and refereeing and what goes on through a referee's point of view, because I think as a coach, it's good to keep me grounded and good to hear from an incredibly important person on the basketball court, which is the referee. And I've had the opportunity in previous episodes a few years ago to do that. And I'm really excited to be able to do that here today as well. We're going to talk about refereeing, and specifically my focus for this one is going to be on refereeing more on the youth side, more on the younger side, because I think that it's a really unique position to be a referee who's coaching more of the youth game and seeing what their perspective is about what's happening in the youth game, what are the coaches like, what's happening playing wise, and just kind of in general what it's like to referee at that level, and hopefully at the same token also maybe inspire some people listening to either get involved or inspire others to get involved with refereeing as well. So that's going to be our topic today. I'm very happy to be joined by a very busy individual, as I mentioned off air. He is he does scouting. He's a ref. He's an assistant girls basketball coach. I think, as you mentioned, I think you coach golf in there as well. Real
Yes,
busy man. Coach Justin Feinberg is with me today. Coach, thank you for carving out some time to talk to me here. How you doing?
For sure. Love to talk hoops, and thank you for reaching out. I appreciate it. Looking forward to being on the show.
So you got a lot of different pathways that you've taken here. So I know you're coaching, you're reffing, you're doing all that. So scouting. So let me just ask you, how did you get into all of these things? How did these opportunities, one, how did all of these kind of opportunities come up for you? Like, what was your journey like? And then two, like, what made you interested in all these different avenues as well?
Okay, so I've always been a sports guy my whole life growing up, and I always wanted to, work in the sports field. And I was really into, dissecting the game, watching, looking at defenses, offenses, player tendencies, whatever. And actually, I played on the freshman team in high school, and then I got cut sophomore year, and I always wanted to be involved with the game. So I decided to go get involved with my local town in reffing and coaching. Just, the local town league, they were looking for high school coaches, and high school kids to coach, and I really liked it. So then I just kept taking it further and further. I started working camps. Then I went to Springfield College, and I took a bunch of sports classes there, sports psychology, coaching and officiating basketball with the women's coach, and, got involved with stuff with the basketball programs there. And then when I graduated from college, it was the COVID year, but I was looking online for jobs, and I found Prep Hoops Scout, and I started scouting for Prep Hoops. And I've always really liked scouting, and the only good thing about the pandemic was all the games were online, so I could flip through, watch Newton North, watch Needham. I could be watching 3 different games at one time, and I got into the scouting field, and I really like doing that, and I like working for Prep Hoops. I like giving the exposure to the players. I like being in the gyms, forming the relationships. And then I wanted to get into coaching again. And I was good with coaching at any level. So I started at the middle school level last year at middle school. And then this year I wanted to get into high school. So I got into a high school job. And I actually just put an ad on Twitter if anyone was interested, looking for an assistant. And one coach was very nicely responded, and I've been working with him, and it's been at King Philip, and it's been a very good experience. And I've also got into reffing. So I've always reffed. I did intramurals in college. I did, I've reffed baseball, flag football, whatever. But this summer I took the IBO exam, which is the I don't know if it's the same in Phoenix. I'm not sure exactly, but I took the IBO exam and became a certified official. And I haven't done as many high school games as I would like this year, just because, but I'm coaching, so that's fine because I've been busy with that. But I've been doing a
Yeah.
ton of travel games. I did a lot of AAU games in the fall. I do adult league, so I ref a wide variety. But I just really like basketball and analyzing the game and stuff. So
It's always cool to hear about the stories of people who were able to kind of get something positive out of the COVID and the pandemic and everything. And I feel like in the
yeah,
coaching world, there's a lot of coaches who kind of really took advantage, who were fortunate enough to be healthy and everything like that, and just be able to get like really dive into basketball. Heck, this show started in 2020, so it's pretty
it's
cool to
awesome.
see like all those opportunities that kind of came up. And um so in a general sense, I mean, you kind of mentioned you have coached many different levels at the men's side, women's side, boys, girls. So just in general, what are some unique, challenges or situations that you find yourself in with each group? Is each group and each level, does it kind of bring its own like unique situation that you deal with? Like when if you're going from, what one's gender to the other, one level to the other, are they all like different experiences in your mind?
Well, I try to treat it, basketball is basketball. The only thing I'll say that I've noticed the difference between girls basketball and boys basketball is that in girls basketball, you really got to try to bring their confidence up. And when you can bring their confidence up, that really helps the morale of the team and they start playing, they shoot more with confidence. And with boys basketball, sometimes that's true. Sometimes you got to tell them, don't shoot as much. That's just a little different. But basically, when I coach, I try to treat it. It's basketball is basketball. I don't really try to treat it too differently. But one thing I learned with just coaching in general is the first year I coached a team. It was just an in-town team, but I ran my
Yeah.
1-2-1 press. I ran, my motion offense. I had these set plays, whatever I did, and it worked really well. And I said, "Oh wow, this is really good." Next year, I tried to run the same thing. It was like in seventh grade in-town team. Ran the same thing, and then I did it with the travel team, and we were not good. And I realized after that, I said, unless you're a college coach who's specifically recruiting players for a system, you have to tailor every team based on the personnel you have, and got to realize that some systems won't work for some personnel, and you have to be able to coach different styles. And also you have to be able to coach the different players' personalities too. Like some players respond better to, yelling and screaming, and some players that doesn't motivate them and it turns them off. So you got to just
Hmm.
know who you're dealing with and realize that every team is different. And just because one thing works with one team does not mean it's going to work with the other. You really got to coach to the style of your team.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if we could just have our system in place? Like this is my system, and I'm going to make sure I have the players to run that system. But
Yeah,
we
it's a
don't
little
quite get
easier
that luxury.
it's a little easier in college when you can recruit players. Like you could recruit for your system, which still you want to just recruit the best players. But in high school basketball,
Hmm.
you can't recruit. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have to
yeah.
go with what you got.
Um, when it comes to, I'm also gonna hit this one here because I've been thinking about this now. What is it like when you're putting on your golf coach hat versus your basketball coach hat? Well, what stays the same with that, or how are they different, or what stays similar when you're doing that?
Well, I used to be a little bit intense as a basketball coach, and somebody actually said, "Wow, you coach golf." I can't believe it, to be
Yeah,
honest.
right.
But actually, it's a good change of pace for me. And I actually coach. I've done golf clinics and whatever, but golf is very mental, and it's a technical too. But it's a completely different animal. But I like them both, and they just bring different things that I like about them. But yeah, completely different. You got to be more you want to be very positive with them on the golf course. You got to help them with course management and everything, but different from, you know, trying to motivate a basketball team. But I just
Yeah,
like the change of pace. But
it really and I'm sure there's stuff that you've probably taken from coaching golf that you probably apply to basketball, like on the mental side, right?
oh yeah, like visualization, like at the free throw line, a pre-shot routine and a pre-free throw routine and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, really cool. And then also, as you kind of touched on about coaching at so many different levels before, like I know you talked about how your the system that you're gonna have to run when you coach has to change a little bit depending on who you got. But does your style of coaching change at all depending on the levels that you're at, or do you kind of keep the same sort of like temperament and demeanor and whatnot, or do you feel that you try to be like the same coach you can with every level?
I like to say I like to try to be the same, but the truth is, even certain players, like they just respond to feedback differently. And you really got to figure that out when you get your team. Like, how does my team best respond to what I'm trying to, I'm trying to get them to buy into? And, if some teams respond to, that hard nose approach, that's good, great. But if some teams respond better to, they positive feedback, and some teams, they need that better. So, it really depends on the style of the players, and the personalities of the players too.
Yeah. So but that's a good skill to have though, to make sure that you can kind of switch up your personality a little bit depending on who you're talking to, and just like how you want to change up your coaching style depending on who it is that you're coaching, have to have that flexibility for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing I also noticed is when I explain something, like I might explain, our motion offense or how to defend a screen. The first few years when I was coaching, I understood what I was saying, but the players weren't really getting it. And I needed to realize that I need to think from the perspective of the player I'm trying to get the message across to, not just, okay, I get this and I'm explaining it in a way that I understand it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's something I certainly like have to still like deal with, or try to remember is, we as coaches, right? We invest so much time into diving into basketball, diving into everything, and we have to step back and remember that our players are not spending that much time in that, and we got to make sure we're communicating things in a way that makes sense to a 14 or 15-year-old whose mind might not be completely focused on basketball, or they might have a billion other things going on. We gotta make sure we say it in a way that they can understand.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So specifically focusing on the youth game and your experience refereeing. So let me ask you about your goals. Like when you're reffing at a younger level, what is what do you see as your goals, where at the end of a game you can look at yourself and say, you know what, I did a good job, and that was a well refed game. What are your kind of your goals coaching, or excuse me, being a ref at that level?
So personally, I really enjoy reffing, but you obviously know there's a national shortage because of the way people are acting. But and the way people are acting, and some people just don't want to do it. I actually really enjoy it. I just like being in the game. I feel like I'm in the game. I really get into it. But my goals, first of all, as a ref, some people try to be the star of the show. The goal is actually to be not the star of the show and to go as unnoticed as possible. But when you're refing a young game, you have to create a balance where you don't want the good players to create an advantage. Like if the best player travels and he gets an advantage every time going to the basket, you got to call it. But if there's a kid who can't dribble the ball at all, you don't want to call travel every time. You almost got to be half a coach too when you're reffing at a young level, because you want to, teach them if they make if they travel or they do a jump up and down or a double dribble or something. You want to just say to them, hey, you can't pick up your dribble and then dribble again or something. You want to do that. And then, that's true. But also, but you just got to create that balance between not making sure someone gets an advantage and making sure that somebody, they learn the rules, but you're not calling every 3 seconds. I also believe at the older levels when I'm reffing is I like to let them play through a little bit of contact. I think that you don't want to get the game out of hand. Obviously, you want to manage the game. And I'm also a believer in the fact that you don't ref, you want the rules to be, you want to be good with the rules, but you don't want to ref the book. You want to do game management. So if you're reffing a 6th grade youth game, you don't need to call everything by the book. You need to manage the game and ref to the management of the game, not necessarily, okay, this is, what they would call at the college level. This is a 6th grade game. You got to realize it's a little bit different. But the other thing is, coaches complain about that the refs are terrible, whatever. Well, if it's a 5th grade game, I don't know why they expect better refs, to be honest. But that's just what I don't know. They expect a lot out of the refs when the quality of play can be, sometimes iffy. But
well, and that's probably one of the challenges. I mean, and you alluded to this, right? That I think as coaches, we really have to make sure that we're always grateful that we have referees, especially at the youth level, who are willing to, give up their time and be able to do that. Because I mean, there's such a crisis of referees and such a shortage of it. And I imagine part of it is because referees, and I'm sure you can speak to this, don't necessarily get treated the best, and it isn't always the best most positive environment. I'm sure sometimes when you're out there reffing, even at a youth level.
And yeah, I mean, I obviously have a few stories, but the thing is, you want to realize you're there for the kids. You're not there for yourself as a ref. The coaches shouldn't be there for themselves. You're there for the kids. So, and yeah, but you're not the star of the show. And the thing is, I coach a lot. Obviously, I'm a coach. Before I started reffing, I used to yell at refs all the time, and I thought it was good. Then I started reffing myself, and I said, you know what? It doesn't do you any good as a ref. As a coach, to start yelling at the refs. They're not going to change their call. And if you're nicer to them, you're probably going to get more calls. And it just takes up energy. That's what I try to tell my team. Like, they miss a call, they're not doing it because they're mad at you or they don't like you. They're human too. You're not going to shoot 100%. Refs aren't going to make 100% of the calls. It's only going to really waste your energy if you start yelling at the ref. And I used to yell at refs when I was first started coaching, but now that I've started reffing and realized how hard it is, and they have so much going on in the game, that I think you're better off spending more energy coaching your team up than trying to work the refs. That's just my theory.
It's probably, and that's an interesting point of view, because not only, like, you also probably can see, like, even at the youth level, I'll kind of switch my thought on this. Even at the youth level, like, it is, I'm sure, still difficult to ref, and I'm sure there's things that like those 50-50 calls at a youth level, or things that might get missed, or things that might get overseen. Obviously, you try to be as perfect and precise as possible, but I'm sure you have to, in your experience, think, like, from reffing, like, it gives you, I'm sure, that much more of an appreciation of how difficult that job is, and probably makes you a little bit more patient when you're actually coaching.
Definitely. And I think if every player, I'm not saying they should do this or not, but if every player refs for like maybe 10 minutes, a scrimmage even, they would say, oh my goodness, this is really hard. I feel bad that it is. That ref.
And that's me when I do scrimmages. I'm like, wait, who is that off of? Like, oh man, like, oh god, this is hard.
Yeah, it's not. It's not easy. And then anyone can learn the rules of the reffing. Like, anyone could get 100% of the rules test. But once you get in the environment, you get people yelling at you. It changes everything. You got to be thick-skinned, and you really got to, have the right mind and not overreact when someone says that's a travel, that's a foul, or something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned also that a like part of your responsibility, I think at the youth level, and I think you touched on this a little bit, is also to make the experience enjoyable for your players, right? And how you want to. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I know as a youth coach that was definitely a priority, but also as a ref, do you feel that part of your job is also to make sure that the players at the youth level are enjoying themselves and continue to be playing the game?
Yeah, that is definitely part of the job as a ref. I mean, you don't want to make calls in favor of one person who doesn't look like they're having a good time or something, but you do want to, tell them, if you make a call, you should the only thing the ref should know is they should just explain why they made a call, especially at the youth level, so they can learn from it. And then I feel like if you call something on them and you explain to them, that means you're helping their enjoyment level. If you're just, trying to act like the star of the show, I don't think you're helping the enjoyment of them. But I also don't think a coach who just yells at the refs the whole game is really helping the enjoyment, honestly, of the players either. And I used to be in that I used to be that coach too, so I really can relate to that. But that's what I think.
Yeah, no, I know that makes sense, and I think that it's good to just try and remember that, refs want the players, especially at a younger level, to have a positive experience. I think that anyone who's getting into refereeing, right, getting into refereeing loves basketball and wants to continue that love of the game to be passed down in the youth level. And so
Exactly.
they're giving that time up, to do that. And I think that refereeing, and maybe we don't think about this sometimes as coaches, but those who are reffing especially at a youth level are doing it because they love basketball and they love giving players an opportunity to be playing it.
Exactly. That's definitely why many refs are there. Definitely. Sure. Yeah.
What do you see as a ref? What do you see great youth coaches do? What are some of those positive experiences or things that you've observed through reffing younger games that you notice that the real good youth coaches are doing?
Yeah, I think there are some youth coaches where they just care about winning, and if it's like fifth grade, sixth grade, whatever, you should be more concerned about the process over the process over like the short term goals. Like the way I judge a coach, and I look at myself too. I don't look at it how many games did we win. I look at it from the day of the first practice to the last day we had a game. Or did we improve? And does everyone want to play again next year? So was it a good experience for the kids? And did we improve as a team? You can only do so much with the talent you have, but if you get the most out of them and they all enjoy it, that's what I think best coaches do, youth coaches do. And they also focus on the fundamentals. Some fourth grade coaches, they spend a whole practice working on a 2-3 zone. It's like, first you should learn your man rotations before you even think about doing a zone. But you should, once they get the fundamentals, those they're going to have with for their whole basketball career. And also, I'm big into teaching life lessons as a coach too. I think you can learn a lot from basketball that you can't learn as much. You can't learn these lessons in the classroom necessarily. Like you can learn teamwork, going through how to manage adversity, and I think those are big lessons that even off the court will really help you.
And so that is reassuring to hear, because I as a coach am always happy when our younger coaches and those working at the youth level are focused on teaching basketball and just like teaching it the right way rather than chasing wins. And I'm glad that in your experience you're having that. And I imagine too that those teams that are those coaches that are going about it the right way, that I'm hoping also that they're having like a real positive attitude, and that they're teaching a lot of teamwork, and that you can kind of see like those players just having a really good experience while also learning something at the same time.
Yeah, the one thing I do find that is tough is when you get a kid who's like bigger than everyone in, say, fourth grade. If you teach them guard skills at a younger age, sometimes those kids end up having to play guard when they get to high school level. So, do you just put them in the post the whole game, or do you try to teach him guard skills because you think about the future that he may not be the biggest player once he gets to high school? He's going to need to learn how to, handle the ball and shoot more, because he won't be the biggest player every game he plays,
And that's what comes with, like, as you mentioned, like great youth coaches just kind of coaching all like the fundamentals and all of the skills, because you can't project what a third or fourth grader or fifth grader is going to necessarily grow into or be. Like, heck, I think I was like 6 feet by about fifth grade, and then I stayed there and I didn't grow anymore after that. So I was not, my post skill set that I may have developed in fourth or fifth grade, I don't think was going to benefit me too much at a certain point. Yeah, those
that's why when I was coaching, I always said, we're all going to do ball handling, we're all going to do guard skills, because these kids are young, like, and especially with the way the basketball's turning into nowadays, everyone's shooting and everyone's handling the ball more than ever. But you gotta
kind of, everyone has to be a guard.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So you brought up something, and I think that's and I wanted to talk about this. You mentioned how, like, if any, if people in general, had 10 minutes to ref, and then they would realize very quickly, right, how difficult it is and how much is going on. So in general, this question kind of popped in my mind. What are some things in general about refereeing that you think that you do that you think others who aren't aware about refereeing or haven't done it before? What are some things that you're doing throughout the course of the game, or observing or watching or looking at, that you think from an outside or an unknown perspective wouldn't know? Like, what are some things that you're doing that if to the like they would not be noticed to the untrained eye?
Okay. First of all, some coaches are unfamiliar with the rules, especially at the younger level, like over the back, for example. is not an actual call, and that you get that yelled at you a lot of games. That's over the back. Well, it's actually just a push, and if they don't make contact, can't be a foul. So rules are one thing, but just some things that they don't understand. Like, first of all, this is just one thing in general. The speed of the game is so fast. You always watch college basketball games, and they go to the monitor like NBA games. They're in the monitor in the last 2 minutes like 20 different times, and we don't have that luxury. We just have to make those calls in a split second. But something people don't notice is that 99% of people that watch basketball, they're just watching the ball. Like, they just see what happens on the ball. But we have our primary coverage areas, so they got to they like, you almost never get really a complaint when you call something away from the ball, but it means that if they're doing that the ref is watching the right areas. You got to really realize we got our primary coverage areas, so you get a complaint from a coach sometimes like, why wasn't that a foul? And sometimes I'm not even watching the ball because
I wasn't looking
that's
at
not
that
my
area.
coverage area. That's not my area. And they don't really realize like which ref and what our coverage areas are. And they'll argue about calls that are not our calls. So they got to realize like, this is their coverage area. This is this area. That's one thing they don't know. And it's actually very tiring being a ref, mentally and physically. I think that people don't underestimate how tiring it is. First of all, you're running up and down the court the whole game, but it's also mentally tiring, and you don't get a break, and it can be stressful sometimes. So that's another thing I don't think people realize is just the mental and physical toll a game can take too.
Yeah, and especially and I think any ref who's doing their job well and doing their job with fidelity is also, trying obviously to be perfect. They're focusing and to focus for that length of time. I think that's an underrated how tiring that is to have that level of like focus for that long. It can drain you really quickly to try and pay attention and concentrate on something, let alone when you have 10 moving bodies and all these other things going on for that length of time.
Yeah, and the other thing you also don't realize in the youth game is like, if it's 5 o'clock in a day, this could be my 8th game of the day, and they think you're going to be sharp like it's your first game. But some days I've literally been going since 9 a.m. and it could be 5 p.m. and I've been doing games since 9, and they don't realize that like I'm not going to be as good as I was at 9 a.m. because it's been a long day. But I tend to do a lot of games in a day, but they also need refs to do so many games now that they really don't have a choice but have people doing 8 games in a day.
Right. If there was another option, or if there was other people who are willing to do it, then maybe you wouldn't have to do so many, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
but I think the main thing drawing people away from reffing is that people just don't like controversy. I think some people, and you can get into a lot of controversy. And, even if you're 99% right in the game, if you shoot 99% in the game, that's pretty good. If you're reffing, you're 99%. You're only going to hear about the 1% you miss.
Well, I think for a lot of people I know who've either have reffed and no longer do it, or have had the opportunity to ref and kind of shied away from it. It's I think for a lot of them, they just think it's just not worth it to deal with all of that. It's not. They don't want to have to deal with the abuse or the insults or things like that. I think for a lot of people, it's like, why am I the enemy here when I'm giving up my time to try and do this sort of thing? Yeah, I might be getting paid for it, but at the end of the day, like, I'm not trying to do this and endure all of this abuse. And I think that if we keep on that path, we're going to keep losing more and more refs, and then what are we going to do?
Yeah, and the other thing is, and I also do baseball and flag football, and some of these things, they all translate to the other sports. But what was I going to say? I was going to say that, yeah, but I think I don't know that if parents or players, whatever, were worse a long time ago than they are now, but I do think with social media that once, if a parent runs after a ref, it gets posted 1,000 times and then 1,000 people see it. As before, not as many people heard about it. So I think just when there's one incident, more people hear about it than they used to hear about it due to social media and all that stuff.
Yeah, it gets really amplified, right? Like everything is just blown up a lot more than it ever was before, for sure. You touched on this. You touched on this a little bit. So I was just curious in your experience on the youth side. Things that you wish or would like to see youth coaches in general do more. I think you talked about teaching the fundamentals, right? Or things that maybe coaches could do, or you would encourage coaches maybe to continue doing to make the game more enjoyable, and while also like being a good basketball coach to their players?
Yeah, I would just say worrying about the process over like just winning one game at the youth level at fourth grade. I would just say just looking at the long term, teaching them fundamentals, teaching them, correct man defense before you switch to zone. I actually think if you can learn man defense, and zone defense isn't that hard to learn. That's just what I found. And just teaching them, the basic skills. Everyone needs to learn, everyone needs to learn how to dribble with their weak hand before they try to do, a step back crossover or something. You got to learn the basic fundamentals, because once they learn the basic fundamentals, then everything can come with it. But if you don't have the fundamentals down, you can't really get anything going until you learn the fundamentals. So I think focus on the fundamentals, focus on the process. And I would say don't be as concerned about winning as you are just developing the players so they want to play again next year and they learn the valuable skills.
Yeah, isn't that I think I've heard that said before. That's like the ultimate like marker of like a successful youth coach is if all of the players come back to play the sport the next year. Like then you've done your job well, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So do you see in your environment, not to, this is just in a general sense, you don't have to necessarily put anyone on blast, but do you see at the youth level this pressure from whoever it may be, this pressure in general to chase, victories over coaching the game the right way?
Yeah, and I also think, I don't know if I see this more at AAU than like a town league.
Mm-hmm.
Parents are are concerned about scholarships, and they're even thinking about that at like, I even had a parent once come up to me in fifth grade, like, you realize there's a scout here for my son or something. And it was like a fifth grade AAU game, which I don't know what she was talking about, to be honest. But I think that, with just how focused these parents get on, like, if they start them at a young age, eventually they're going to be this D1 athlete or something. I think some people, I don't want to say about everyone, have just lost the whole, process, and that we're trying to teach what we're trying to teach versus just like, oh, I got to get my kid this exposure now and stuff like that. But I think that, yeah, winning, if you win a game at a fifth grade AAU tournament, does it really matter? I mean, it's nice to win. I obviously would want to win too if I was a coach, but the process, if you see how they are in a few years versus how they are now, that's more important to me than just whether you win the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And it's I imagine, I'm curious. And do you feel like there's a lot of pressure on the players at the youth age that you coach at? Can you like get a sense that these players, that when you're coaching them, that they're reffing their games? Do they seem like they're stressed or have the weight of the world on their shoulders, or what's, especially in like these AAU type events or these more competitive things? Like how are the kids doing during these sort of things?
For one thing, I would say is that, I don't want to say all parents are bad. Obviously, there's a lot of good ones out there, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a coach on the team. So let the coach coach, and don't try to coach. I know everyone says this a million times, but don't try to coach from the sidelines, because it's already enough for them to have one coach telling them what to do. And half of them don't even understand what the one coach is telling them. So when you have a parent telling them something completely different, it just creates them more stress, and they just are more like flustered out there and more confused. Like, just let the coach coach. And if you want to coach your son's team, if that's a good dynamic, I've seen it work and not work, do it. But when the coach is the coach, just let him do the coaching. I think that's one thing that does create more dynamics. I think that also, when you pick a kid up from a game, if the parent doesn't go, the first thing they'll ask them is, how many minutes did you play? How many points did you score? Whatever. That shouldn't be the right question they should ask. When they get in the car, they should ask, okay, did you enjoy playing? What did you learn? What do you think you did well? What could you have done better? Which is more important to ask. But I think the pressure now has just become way more, because as I said about the scholarships, I think parents believe, honestly, some of them, if they start them at a very young age, they're going to become Division I athletes. And, that works for some, but I don't think it's the case for everyone. I think most people, division, I don't think it's bad to play at any division, any college level. I think if you're playing in college, there's only like 5% of people that play in college. I think that's awesome. But, I think that people should just be more concerned about them just enjoying the game, learning the fundamentals, and thinking that if they're kids in fourth grade, they're going to grow up and get a scholarship or something.
Yeah. And I just imagine that probably in turn, and for you coaching, leads to more comments and more things you probably hear from parents, just because that not only do they have all this pressure they're putting on their players at a young age, but then I'm sure in turn you're hearing it too, even at these very uh, youth events. You're probably hearing it from parents as if it's a collegiate level game or a professional game or something.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said this earlier in the thing, if you're reffing a game that's like, a town league game where people haven't played, most of them haven't even played basketball before. So the quality of play isn't great. Why do they expect, I just don't understand why they expect the quality of reffing to be like NBA refs. They expect them to get every single call right.
Going to the monitor.
And if it's a judgment, the thing is, if you want, as a coach, I don't believe in arguing, but if you argue a rules call, that's one thing. But a judgment call, you really can't argue a judgment call. And if a coach is on the other sideline trying to argue a call, they can't see. They're not in the right position that the ref is in. So they really don't have a way to argue the call because they can't see what the ref is seeing.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's just I think it's sometimes really hard for us, and I know, and I'm speaking for me as well, like we end up taking these things probably a lot more personally than we should, or think that a call that we think is made wrong is some personal attack against us, or something personal that this ref had it out for me or something like that. But like I know that's not the case. And taking a deep breath as a parent, or as a ref, or as a coach rather, and just think logically or think rationally would probably help me, I know. But sometimes that's easier said than done for me to think rationally about these things.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I don't know how they, the way they ref in the NBA, that's completely different. They're looking at it like, oh, these refs are doing this for the stars. At the youth level, half the refs are honestly just there because they just like the game of basketball, and they just want to see the youth succeed in basketball, and they want to get it out there, maybe make a few dollars, whatever. There's no refs that really get up in the morning and say, I'm going to screw over the blue team today or something. And some games, when I do town league games, I could be with a freshman in high school. And, I sometimes will say, like, I'm 23 years old. This kid's a freshman in high school. You don't keep yelling at a freshman in high school. He's learning to ref. Like, I'm trying to teach them how to ref here. Like, but
yeah. No, I agree. Like, it's have to remember that if we're, especially like a high schooler in particular, right? Like, that's great that people in high school or younger individuals are reffing. Like, we need them to ref, and we also need to understand that them reffing is, they also need to be allowed to make mistakes and be able to grow as refs, right? And that comes with making mistakes. And it's again, it's so rational of a thought, but I think a lot of us, myself included, sometimes we just sort of lose it.
Yeah, and I actually was like that until I started reffing myself. So I can totally sympathize with coaches because I'm a coach too, and I used to be like that. But I started as a young ref, and at just a low level, and now I'm this is how you get refs. They start at a young level, or this is how you get coaches. They start at a young level, and then they work their way up. So this is why. Yeah.
Are there on that end, just to give you a platform to do a little bit more of teaching as well? Are there calls that you make that you think in general? I know you mentioned over the back as one, but are there calls or that you make that you think in general maybe people don't really have like a good grasp of the rules or understand why you made that call? Or are there any things that you see over and over again that maybe people incorrectly are getting upset at you about?
Okay, over the back is one. You don't get a disadvantage for being tall, and if they don't make contact, it can't be a foul. Second one is the side of the backboard and the top of the backboard are inbounds, and you get that one every game. The third one is people don't realize, like, when you go to the basket, okay, if you don't initiate the contact, if the defender does not initiate the contact, it can't be a foul. The other thing is, if you put your hands straight up, but you lean into them, that is a foul every time. And you always say straight up. Well, you were straight up, but you jumped into them. So that's still a foul. The other one you get is he was moving when he was taking a charge. That one, you can be moving and taking a charge as long as you're vertically straight up and down. You get a lot of coaches actually who argue about the possession arrow at the start of the second quarter and third quarter. They don't understand that counts for the possession arrow. You get coaches who, what other ones? Kickball. You have to make a kicking motion. You can't just throw it off of someone. What did I have the other day? I had someone. I've had people argue all kinds of things. They just maybe some of the coaches need a refresher on the rules, but those are the most basic ones that people argue, I would say. The 5-second call, some coaches don't. I don't know if they changed it in where you are, but they changed it here where it's no longer if you're dribbling, only if you're holding the ball. Actually,
okay.
this year
Yeah.
did they change that where you are too?
Yes. Interesting. Yeah, I've the 5-second one. I used to hear that all the time from coaches. They're screaming 5 seconds, 5 seconds all the time.
And this year they actually changed now that instead of like doing the hand motion for the 10-second violation, you don't do it. You just do it with the shot clock. So I'm waiting for coaches to start yelling, he's not counting the 10 seconds, but they don't do that anymore. The one thing I'll say at the youth level when I ref, I try to do preventive refereeing, preventive whistleblowing. You know, if a kid's in the lane, I'm going to try to tell them, buddy, you got to move out of the lane. Number 3, you got to move out of the 3 seconds. You got to move in and out of the paint, or, watch the hands. I always when I'm doing with hand checking fouls, I always say the hot oven rule. If you just touch your hand on the oven, you're not going to burn yourself. But if you burn yourself, that's a foul. But, I try to say, like, watch the hands, get out of, you got to move out of the lane. But after you give them a few warnings, you got to start calling something. But
yeah. And I think that's also really, really healthy or helpful, I think, for kids to, especially at the younger level, right? You're trying to, let them know what it is they need to do, let them know, hey, like 3 seconds, or let them know what's about to happen, and just help them along a little bit so that they understand what's happening. Because I like you mentioned, right, like part of your role as a youth ref is coaching in a way, and letting them know what the rules are. And I think that's probably really helpful for them, just give them those gentle reminders along the way.
exactly. Yep. Very important. Yeah.
Yeah, the 3 seconds one in particular is one I've always been personally grateful for. Even at the freshman games, I know when I've had refs who've politely given the warning about 3 seconds. I've always appreciated that. That's always been really nice.
Yeah.
Youth level. I'm curious about just when, in general, in your experience, how are players? How do they interact with you as refs? Are you having positive conversations? Do you think youth coaches are doing a good job talking to their players about how to interact with refs? What do you kind of in general see in terms of like the way players interact with referees?
I think a lot of players honestly they watch the Celtics a lot, and I like Jason Tatum, to be honest, but he argues with the refs a lot, so they sort of just like to look up to the stars. And if they see Tatum yelling at the ref, they probably try to. That might cause the yell a little more. But I think that when they're kids, if a kid starts arguing a little bit, they're kids, so I usually, if it's like a 4th grader, they're mad over a call, I usually say, like, buddy, calm down. But the coaches are supposed to set the example. And what I find is that some coaches are nice and very nice, and some, but when the coaches start arguing, I sometimes feel like it rubs off onto the players.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
what I don't like, because I think they should be setting the example. If they have a question for me, they can clearly ask a question. But it's when they start, being derogatory and start screaming, it's like, that doesn't set a good example. You're here to set an example for the kids. You're not here to make yourself the star and act like you know all the rules here.
So in your experience, and I think a lot of people have this experience as well, right? That the player conduct tends to follow what you see the coach doing.
Yeah, I do notice that. I mean, I've had some. I won't share them in this. I could go over some bad stories I've had with, I'll just say one parent once followed me to his house, followed me to my house and stuff. But luckily, that rarely happens. But yeah, I mean, they just take it so personally sometimes. It's just unbelievable.
In your experience, what are some of the skills that you think youth players should be working on? You're seeing a lot of games, and you're seeing a lot of things at the youth level. And as you watch the games, and as you watch the quality of basketball that's being taken place in your area, what are some things that you think youth players should be working on, or also what are like the successful youth players that you see doing that are helping set themselves up to be successful in the future?
Okay, first of all, everyone wants to shoot threes nowadays, but you shouldn't be shooting threes so you can make layups. You can consistently shoot. I actually think it could screw up your shooting form. I think you got to learn how to one-handed shooting form, learn to shoot the right way. I think that sometimes when you teach someone to do something, and I have experiences with giving golf lessons sometimes too, it might feel a little bit weird when you first do it, but you just got to stick to the process. And if you stick to the process at a younger age, it's going to be much easier when you're older. If you've been used to doing something for the last 6 years and then someone tries to change it, that's pretty difficult. But what they should work on is the basic fundamentals. They don't need to start working on, doing crazy dribble moves or whatever. They need to work on using their offhand, making layups, going strong to the basket, learning to use their pivot foot, learning how to make passes, pass fakes, learning how to play man defense, stay between the ball and the basket, the basic fundamentals, learning how to box out, learning how to space the floor. That's one thing that's hard. You get a lot of players they just pass the ball and they cut to the ball. You want to teach them the basics, how to set proper screens, how to space the floor, learning all those basic skills.
And then are you seeing some of those things taking place at the youth level? You seeing some good stuff of that happening?
Oh, there's definitely a wide range, but I definitely do see good stuff, and you see some that aren't great. I think the thing is about AAU is, everyone has their own feelings on AAU now. It's just you play so many games, so it's hard. With my high school team, we practice like a lot, but AAU, they play so many games. It's just sometimes it can be hard to work on the skills as much. But
no, absolutely, and so you're seeing the three epidemic, huh? You're seeing the amount of threes that are taking place.
Yeah, I see a fourth grade team the other day. They're just shooting around at halftime of one of the games I was reffing, and the kids are jacking up threes, and they can't even they can't even make layups. And I am like, you shouldn't even be thinking about shoot. I don't even think threes counted in the league, in that league. I gotta remember what league it was. Yeah, and it's like, if you can learn the basic fundamentals, three-pointers will come eventually. But if you start shooting threes now, you're gonna end up shooting from the side, and bad fundamentals will happen. Start with layups, work on shots inside and around the rim, and then work your way back once you get more comfortable. Don't work your way in. Even Steph Curry, every game he does, every time he goes on the floor, he starts with one-handed shooting before he does his great
form
shots out there.
Form
shooting. Learn the basic fundamentals and learn to use your offhand too. And I think it's honestly, when you're first starting basketball, I think it's easier to learn to use your offhand than it is when you're later in life, because if you're not able to, you do a right-handed layup and it feels weird, it's going to feel weird with your left hand too. So
I agree that when that muscle memory, once that starts, it's hard to try and retrain something like that. So if you start with both, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing I said is everyone should learn all skills, because with size being a factor, you don't know if you're going to be the tallest player when you get to high school, or you're going to be back to being one of the smallest players. So everyone should learn all the skills.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of give a little pitch. I know we have a nationwide referee shortage, and a lot of people are shying away from it and aren't interested in it. But I know it's clearly something you love and enjoy doing. So what would be your pitch, for a lack of a better term, or what would be your call to people to potentially get started or get involved in becoming a referee, and why you feel it's so important?
I would say if you really like basketball and your playing days are coming to an end, it's a very good way to stay involved with the game and, to still be out in the basketball court in a competitive environment. And that would be my number one reason why. I'd say it also, it's just a great way to stay involved with the game. And if you really like it, and, they will train you how to do it. So even if you've never ref before, don't make that be a reason you don't. And like anything, with practice, you'll get more comfortable. But I would say if you really love basketball, it's a great way to stay involved with the game, and you get to see a lot of different players and a lot of different styles of games. And that's why I like to ref. So that's why I would say it's good. And you make a few dollars too doing it, which doesn't hurt either.
But always nice to be able to, have a couple dollars to show for it at the end, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. How as we start to wrap up a little bit, I'm curious about and we talked about this a little bit, but what do you do either differently, or what do you do the same? Or how is being a ref affected your coaching?
Well, it's affected me in one way that I used to yell at a lot of refs, and I
Right,
really
right.
don't anymore because I know how hard their job is. But I've understand the rules better, and I understand much better because I did the eyeball class. So I can understand if there is a call on the floor. I can go to one of the players and I can explain, like, you weren't in legal guarding position because of this, or it can't be a moving screen if you're not making contact. Like, you don't need to worry or something. Like, I understand those rules. I also think I've just seen a lot of basketball too. So, I see teams who run different offenses against the zone, run different offenses against a man, run different inbounds plays. And that too. And it just gets you thinking of the game because you're on the court, and it's just, seeing basketball in a different perspective. So it definitely does help you as a coach, actually. And yeah.
I like that. I like that idea of like, so you've been out there reffing a game and probably seeing a set or seeing a play run, just kind of file that away in your storage a little bit. Be like, oh, I gotta remember that. I'm gonna take that with me.
Yeah, I've actually seen inbounds plays where I've said, "Oh, nice play, coach. I might use that or something." I definitely have. Yeah,
No, that's fine. You know what? I never even really thought about that as something yeah, that has to happen. That's really cool. And just see you there, kind of like, oh yeah, I got this from a game that I was able to ref and things like that. That is funny.
and before I started roughing, when I used to watch basketball, I used to watch the ball, like I said, most people do. But I'm so focused on my primary coverage areas when I'm actually roughing that I have now learned to see more about off-ball movement, honestly, and it's taught me more about how people cut and how people move without the ball because I used to be so ball-centric watching the games, and now I don't really do that as much. So
Yeah, you're watching the game differently now, right? Like what you're looking for,
yeah.
especially
Well,
like off
sometimes
ball
when I
stuff. Yeah.
watch a game, I go to a game and I could be watching the game as a scout, watching the refs, watching it to a coach. I could be watching a player I've had, a ref I know. There could be a lot of reasons I'm at a game. You never know.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? Who knows why I'm here? So that's funny. You don't know why I'm here. You don't know what it is I'm
Yeah.
here to. What my purpose is. What it is that I'm doing. Oh no, that's good. Um. So before we one other question here before we hit our concluding segment, something that I was just personally curious about. What when you're when you're done at the end, and you're done with a game, is there a do you go through like a reflection process? How do you kind of reflect on your success in that game? Like I know we talked about like on the youth level, right? We took at success as like the players enjoying themselves, as a positive environment, so on and so forth. But in terms of like whether or not you feel like you called the game correctly, like how do you kind of like reflect and self-reflect on that when a game is done?
Okay, so we're talking about as a ref here. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say, well, you want to have a short memory as a ref. So if I do make a mistake, sometimes I like to learn from it, and sometimes I try to just forget about it if it's in the middle of the game. But sometimes there's not a lot of reflection time because I'll have like 7 games after. But after the end of the day, I try to just, talk to the other ref about how he did and if there's anything he thinks of that. Because, some of these refs are more experienced than me sometimes. And I'll say, how do you think we did? What do you think we could have done better? I always try to learn one thing from, each game I did. Like, okay, I got to learn one thing. There's one thing I learned in this game, whatever it could be. And I just try to think about it. And, mentally, I just try to just say, like, okay, I missed
Mhm.
a few calls, but for the most part, I like to think I did pretty good after all the calls you look at you did in one day. But you try to learn something from each game you do, and you work with a different ref too each time, and everyone refs a different style, so you try to learn a little bit about their style as well too.
Is there a certain area or certain skill set of refereeing that you think you've improved on more so than others since you've started refing?
Definitely the most important part of making a call as a ref is being confident and being loud. And, a lot of young refs are just not confident enough. And if you sound confident, you'll get a little bit less arguing. So I would say definitely being confident, blowing loud whistle and making confident calls. Definitely. And I definitely, as I've gotten certified, I've learned the rules much better and gotten better at my primary coverage areas. That's what I've gotten much better at. At the beginning, everyone used to tell me, don't watch the ball so much. Now I'm better at the primary coverage areas. That's the one thing I've gotten better at.
You know what? I could vouch for that. That if I think just maybe that's just human psychology, right? That if you're gonna, even if you are wrong, if you're wrong confidently, I feel almost better probably than somebody who is correct but not sure of themselves. Like I think there's something to be said of that. Like, you know, if you are confident, like you got to make that call confidently, and I think that probably hope that maybe not in all cases, but as you mentioned, maybe can take away a lot of conversation if the coach, right, nobody expects any weakness or suspects any weakness out of you, and you're being confident in yourself, that can maybe stop a lot of conversations from taking place.
Exactly. And if you do make a mistake and you know it, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to say, Coach, I'm sorry. I'm not perfect. I missed that one. My fault. And sometimes they'll argue and sometimes they'll say, no worries. Thank you for saying that. But that you're not going to be perfect. But that is true. If you're confident and you can explain why you made the call, you're going to get less arguing. That's definitely true.
I like that a lot. To wrap up, Coach, there's a couple of questions I ask every guest. So go ahead and start with this first one here. Thinking back on whether it's your coaching career or whether it's your refereeing career, I'll just say your career in general. What is a moment from your career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
Well, I'd say, I've won my fair share of games. I've lost my fair share of games. But when even if they're in fourth grade, when you see the players in about this, honestly, this is not one specific game. But when you see them in about 3 or 4 years and they're still playing and they're still enjoying the game, and then, you see them in a few years and they say, oh, Coach, how you doing? You know that you made an impact on their life that carried on the court and off the court. And if you can do that, that's better than any wins and losses I think that you can get. So even though I've won championships, I've lost championships as a coach, I would say if you can make an impact in their life and you can see them in a few years and they're still enjoying basketball and they still remember what you did for them, that's the most important thing you can get out of it as a coach. And as a ref, I would say, I guess just, once I passed my certification, just getting more confident doing my first varsity AAU game, which was tough, but I got through it, and now I feel much more confident reffing games. So, I guess that's basically it.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And so you have those experiences of players coming back and talking to you and still enjoying themselves and talking about how much they still love playing. You got those experiences going?
Oh yeah, I mean,
That's awesome.
There was a couple of kids I've coached in fourth grade, and now they're playing on the high school team. And I went to the game the other day, and they were like, "Oh, Coach, how you doing?" And they were still enjoying it, and to see how they progress, that's better than any wins and losses I think that you can get.
Yeah, you're able to recognize them from fourth grade onward. I don't know if I'd be as lucky. I'd be like, oh no, I don't know if I'd recognize the middle schoolers I coached at. I don't know how many I'd recognize as high schoolers.
Yeah, sometimes I just recognize the name, but some of them I've coached at camps also too.
Oh, so, that's awesome. That's really cool. I mean, it's kind of like full circle what we talked about, right? Keeping the players, keeping them from the youth level and having them still play. So I'm sure there's things that you saw them do and you're like, oh, I taught them that. I coached them that in fourth grade, right?
And as a high school coach, if you're very involved, you don't need to be very involved, but if you have a feeder program and you get the kids going from fourth. I did this even with my golf team. I started golf clinics and we had more kids try out this year because of that. But if you get the kids going from a young age and you start, those are the ones that grow up and have successful high school programs versus the ones that, they just come into high school and then you just see what you got.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox. Feel free to go longer though. I don't time anyone on this, but it's your platform to kind of get out your kind of a final thought, a closing message, just something that you want to go ahead and leave the listeners with. So you can kind of take this any direction you want. I'm just going to kind of open up the floor for you, and I'm just going to kind of let you go and take it from here.
Well, I have emailed the Celtics when they were looking for a new coach and they didn't want me. But if they do want me, I actually did. And I spoke to Brad Stevens, but that's story for another day. But seriously, as a coach, you can make a lot of impacts in players' lives. And they really do remember you, for how you acted. And they remember those things more than the wins and losses, as much as we all do really want to win. But if you really enjoy the game, I would say as a ref, or if you want to be a scout or a ref, there's a lot of opportunities out there. Just get yourself involved, and there's a lot of room to learn. And they need a lot of good people. There's a lot of good people, but they can
Mhm.
always use more people. So, and there's a lot of passionate people about basketball. And I would just say, one advice I give for every ref is just learn the coverage areas and be confident. And as a coach, I'd say just value the process over the long-term goals, over the short-term goals. And that's basically about it. Yeah. And as a scout, I just would say that, what you watch for is just looking at players' tendencies, looking at, how they move off the ball. But one thing I would say when I'm with college coaches and they're scouting at games is that you want to see how they impact the game when they're not scoring and when they're not playing well. And that's what a lot of kids need to realize, that if you don't have a good game and a scout is there, they want to see how your body language is. They want to see how you're acting in the game, because they know you're not going to be scoring 30 points every game. But just that's one thing I'd say that's also very important. But I look forward to keep working in basketball. And since the Celtics don't want me, I'll be keeping doing what I'm doing here.
Well, when the Celtics do come calling, I'll remember the
Thanks.
name. That's funny.
I
Coach,
appreciate it.
thank you so much for coming on, talking about reffing, talking about coaching, talking about all of your experiences that you have. And I think just as a kind of my own closing thought to that, just hopefully, I know it's hard and it's hard for me too, but hopefully all of us, coaches, refs, parents, all of us can continue to work together to make the game a positive experience for our players. So Coach, thank you. Best of luck with reffing and coaching going forward. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Coach, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Coach.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.